Retro.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the Armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we have a guest, Greg from, you've heard him on the Long Take Review podcast, Roll a Base Card, and you know him on Instagram as Ion Cannon. So, Greg, welcome to Podcast Stardust once again.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here, especially given our topic tonight. It's a special time to be a fan of what we're talking about.
Exactly. And what we are talking about is Trials of the Jedi, which is the final novel in the High Republic, of course, written by Charles Soule. It came out in June of this year. But before we get into that discussion, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely, Dennis. My pleasure as always. We're on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So here we are, the final novel of the High Republic. And I would call it the finale of the High Republic if there wasn't a one-issue comic that Kevin Scott put out at the end of July that we still need to go. I haven't read yet, but I suspect you have, Greg.
I have. It's good.
Yeah,
I think you got the big picture here, but it's a nice little cherry on the sundae.
All right. Well, good to know. And so again, this will be a full spoiler discussion. It is it's bittersweet. I've enjoyed this ride that we've had for the High Republic for, what are we at now? 3.5 years, 4 years or so. I mean, it started in 2021 after it got delayed by COVID from its 2020 start. So it's been quite the journey. Before we get into the details, why don't we go around the table and give some overall thoughts, and then we'll get into the discussion. So, Greg, you first. What did you think about Charles Soule's Trials of the Jedi?
I have to admit, I was excited to buy this book, but then I got nervous about it because it is, this has been a huge part of my fandom and my life in general for that long time period. Also during a really hard period of, I think, all of our lives as we adjust to the post-pandemic era and so on. So I was really nervous, but I will say I should have just trusted Charles Soule. I thought this was a beautiful capper to the series, and we'll of course get into specifics, but I think I would say I know it's Revenge of the Sith year, and I very much felt like I did after Revenge of the Sith came out, because it felt like this kind of big operatic kind of conclusion to the Star Wars saga at the time, and just helping us kind of see these kind of beautiful ways the characters all came together. And I think I had a lot of those same feelings, and there are lots of promises about how pieces of this might get picked up for more storytelling. But if this were it for the High Republic, I leave very satisfied and glad I took the journey.
Satisfied. Very good word. That's what I'll run with. But before I do, Jay, what did you think overall about this?
Well, before I get into that, I have to ask, so is the comic kind of like the post-credits scene in a Marvel's movie, a Marvel movie? Is that kind of how it feels?
I would say yes, but not the one that like teases the next thing. It's more of like, when the Marvel gives you that little fun moment, kind of like, it's more that spirit.
So shall return.
Nice
Well, yeah. So, and there's a lot of, I guess, Marvel feeling to this, because this truly was the end game in the High Republic. And for me, it wasn't just a conclusion. It was kind of a destination. I mean, we've had the culmination of everything. I mean, every piece of media, every story that we've ever gotten. It's really a who's who of all of the different characters and the storylines, but it did it in such a way that you didn't feel like you missed something if you didn't consume it all. because let's face it, there was a lot to consume in the High Republic. And, Dennis and I, we did our fair share of trying to keep on top of it. And I know, Greg, you've been really comprehensive in, everything that you've done with the High Republic. But, it didn't feel like, I think if somebody was reading this book that hadn't consumed it all, they wouldn't feel like they missed out. It did a great job. Charles Soule just did a great job of explaining things, and not just in his storytelling, because he did a fantastic job. I mean, just the verbiage and everything that he did, but the way that he did it in telling it through other characters' eyes and their voices, and literally through, their thoughts and their feelings. And it was so much emotion, so many deep stakes going on here. And yeah, it truly was worth the journey. That's for sure. But Dennis, what do you think?
I think you two put it very, very well. I was very satisfied with this, and I was surprised today when I was finishing my reread ahead of this discussion how much the conclusion of this book was moving me once again on here after we've spent so much time with these characters for over the past 4 years, and then to see it come down to this, to see Marchion Ro get his just desserts at the end of it. There's some almost there's some bittersweet moments at the end of this book. There's it almost, to coin a phrase, historically tragic moments that happen in this book as well. And Charles Soule did just such a fantastic. I mean, he kicked the whole thing off with Light of the Jedi and in the first novel, and he gets wrapped up with the final novel, and did such a great job bookending this whole thing. Jay, I don't think you read any other Charles Soule novels outside of his Star Wars work, but Greg, I believe you have. I mean, you were, I think, one of his backers for the Timeless Vessel, were you not?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And having read some of his non-Star Wars stuff, I could see that his writing, like, it really took on a characteristic, a personality here. And I felt like it shone through, that non-Star Wars stuff showed through in this novel in a way, especially some of the Timeless Vessel type of things here. And so I don't want to overstate it, but this book meant a lot to me. And I was really, really happy with the way it was wrapped up. And I could see myself reading this again before the year is over at this rate, just because, I mean, it's been a big part of my Star Wars fandom. Greg, I like the way you said that, for the past 4 years, and especially in the time we live in, it feels like a goodbye to old friends in a way. And I'm not ready to say goodbye to all these people yet. So I certainly hope there's more to come for the likes of a lot of them there. I've been thinking hard about how to do this discussion, and I can't think of one single great place to start. So what I've settled on is I'm going to kind of adopt the Coffee with Kenobi type style of doing things, and other podcasts have done, which is we're going to go around the table and pick up a discussion topic, and we'll discuss it, and then Gary will turn and move on until we've exhausted this book. Greg, you're our guest, so I'm going to let you go first. What point or what aspect of this book would you like to address first?
I want to give what I think is a strength, and then hear if you two agree, or how you interacted with this. And I think it really actually pulls out a strand that Jay mentioned, which is, I think it's kind of incredible how Charles Soule is able to balance out this book for people who have read every single bit of High Republic and people who have only dipped in now and again. And so one of my good friends here in Boston, Carl, he really stuck to just the adult novels, and he had a fantastic time at Trials of the Jedi, and yet only understood maybe half the references I did, which I think is pretty incredible. So the strength I want to point out related to that is, I'm pretty sure Charles Soule name checks almost every single character that we've met over the course of the High Republic. And this is particularly true in the formation of the 2 Jedi strike teams, right? The 9 and then the backup 9. And I was like gleeful. So I read this immediately upon release. I'd actually ordered the Goldsboro special edition, but I snuck out to Barnes and Noble and got a second copy. I'm like, I'll donate it to the library sale later. I'll make it worth it. And then I listened to it for my second read, just because I always want to hear what Mark Thompson does and so on. So I was so gleeful as I read about the formation of these 2 teams. And while I think it's true that maybe some fan favorite characters didn't get a spotlight as much as some might have hoped, and maybe for me, I would put Vernestra at the top of this list, right? That she's present in the book and she is a character, but she's not on the main team. But I want to just say, I thought it was really wonderful how many characters he worked in and how meaningful a role they had. And if they didn't, then they got a shout out in so many ways somewhere along the line. So I guess to form it as a question is like, did you also have that appreciation for the characters? And were there any characters you particularly were glad to see almost get the promotion to main character, right? On TV, there's the series semi-regular, like I'm thinking of like Parks and Rec, and then the Office people get elevated to the main cast. And I think we had some of that here.
I love that. Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, like the spin-offs it used to get, like Laverne and Shirley was a spin-off of Happy Days. I mean, come on, who can't forget that? So no, I would definitely agree with you, Greg. And what Charles Soule does so well as well with this is that he doesn't make it feel forced. In that when he tells you about these characters and you kind of have that spotlight on each one, he gives them their just due, but he doesn't do it in a gratuitous way. And I think that is so hard to do, to strike that kind of balance in writing and in storytelling. So I definitely appreciated that. And speaking of main themes, that is probably the number one thing for me in this book and just the culmination of the High Republic is just the idea of balance. You've got this balance between light and dark, between life and decay. You've got your political pragmatism and then moral conviction. And, you've got all these different kinds of things going on. And I love the fact that they called the 9 the Luminous 9, because I mean, that's kind of where we started with this whole thing, was Project Luminous. So that for me also kind of brought that back full circle. But that whole idea of balance and just of faith in the Force as well. I mean, Bell brought that, I mean, that was so inspiring, his whole scene in the battle with Marchion Ro and the way that he was able to tap into the light. And then between Avar and Elzar staying on Planet X to create balance between the two of them, which we can talk about this. And I want to put a pin in this. And I'm asking this for potentially later on in the discussion. Maybe we'll discuss it now. But do either of you think that Avar and Elzar represented a dyad, such as Kylo Ren and Rey? So we can talk about that a little bit more. But again, just the whole unity, the balance, that was just a huge, huge thing for me. But Dennis, what about you?
You brought up a whole lot of stuff to talk about there, Jay. That
I always do. I
could
start
be the next hour of the
prattling,
podcast.
I'm just like, and then I just go.
We saw
I
the
know.
post-it. You showed us how many notes you took. So
Yeah.
it's all got to come out.
Yeah. So to just more specific, we'll get to some of those points as we get through the conversation, Jay. And I definitely want to talk about all those things. I hadn't considered the dyad, but we'll get but to address specifically what Greg was talking about. Yes, when I started reading this the first time, I remember getting to the first 100 pages, like, wow, this really is a who's who of the High Republic. And then I was like, but wait a minute, where's Leox Gyasi? Where's Affy Hollow? Where's the, there's, and it's like, where's the Santekas? And there's some players. And I was like, wait a minute, they got their goodbye. And that was in, Into the Light, the young adult novel that Claudia Gray did. And Keith Trennis, she gets name checked, as you suggested, but and we know she's at this battle if you've read the comics. So, the Battle of Viriatu at any rate. So she's there. So I got thinking about it. I was like, yeah, and she does get name checked, and that's fantastic. A lot, almost nearly everybody does. in this book, and I really loved the way that Charles Soule went about that, especially giving Torben Buck as much attention. I couldn't remember anywhere that he got this kind of attention outside of the young adult or the High Republic Adventures, I should say, comics. So to see him get the treatment he did, it was fantastic for that character, that Daniel Jose Older put together. And so, yeah, I agree with you there. But I did have to take a step back, and I was like, really, the finale for the High Republic has been in 3 parts. It's been Claudia Gray's book, it's been Charles Soule's book, and it's been Kevin Scott's comic that's put this all together and given everybody their just due to pull everything together here. But to your point, if you're not reading those other things, at least these people are getting mentioned here, and that there's things getting pulled in. Greg, you're a little bit more thorough on the High Republic than Jay and I have been, so I do have a question for you with regard.
Sure.
Where'd the Rod of Ages come from? I can't remember where the Jedi acquired that from. I know Marchion had the Rod of Power, but I could not remember how the Jedi came across that Rod of Ages. Is that something that sticks out to you? Because to me, it just seemed like all of a sudden they had it in this book.
Yes, I am trying to remember what the name of the comics was. So it's the comics miniseries that Dark Horse published, and it's primarily about Wreath and his Padawan friend and
Amadeo Azazo.
Azazo, right?
Yeah.
I always hear James Arnold Taylor because he used to do a joke on podcasts like Azazo, and so yes. So I believe they tracked down a society through kind of archaeological ways that was tied to the fate of the Nameless, and that's where the Jedi, I believe. You're really making me earn my Ion Cannon name, and I'm worried that your listeners are going to be like, that guy missed it up. But I believe that's true, and I think you're pointing to like this tricky thing where, I agree with you about Torben Buck's big moment. I understand that in the context of the story, a listener can understand, somebody who hasn't read those comics can understand that this is a Jedi sacrificing himself. But it is hard to imagine like any little holes you might have and how you're not getting that full impact from it. So I really want to hear over time kind of more and more from people who dip in and out or skip big pieces. Arkov, the Wookiee, gets a pretty big moment as well, very similar. And he's from the manga, which, I think that might be the most obscure piece of the High Republic project in my mind. I guess some people might say the one I never did was any of the VR related things. I did the Jedi Survivor, but not VR. And I know there are some High Republic clues in there. So there's some pretty obscure stuff at least getting pulled in and talked about here.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was so thrilled on Arkoff and Lily Tarasi showing up in this. And because Jay and I've talked about, I think there's one manga to go that we haven't talked about yet on the podcast that we need to get to. But we love those characters, and getting to see them show up here. And your choice of words with the promotion, I think, is very apt in this context here, because the manga is a bit more niche compared to the novels here. And so to get them, I mean, I haven't researched this, but my guess is that the average person is going to be more in tune with the novels than the comics, than the manga and stuff. And so to see them get that spot in an archive, I mean, that was just that was really cool to see him get here. I was almost a little surprised that Kilnaka didn't show up in here in some capacity, but
yeah, I was going to mention Lily Tora Asi as well, but you beat me to it, Dennis. And Greg, they actually do mention in the book, it's early on, Master Laru is actually talking about the Rod of Ages. And he does say, in fact, that it was acquired by Amadeo and Wreath at a Ptolemite temple in a hall of mirrors. So that's where it came from.
And I did my quick Google. The series is the Echoes of Fear comics, and again, to the point Dennis was making, it's like you have the two main titles of comics, and then you get these little mini series, and as somebody who goes to my shop every week, I found myself missing some. And I, had suddenly bought issue 4 and I was like, oh, I don't know issue 3. And the story makes no sense. So it is, I mean, we said it was satisfying and rewarding to read it all, but it hasn't been easy to necessarily keep on top of it. So, I think I imagine fans in the future are going to have just a big checklist, and it'll be interesting to see how prominent some of these things remain, or if some get left behind along the way.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, it's
I
a lot
definitely have.
like Legends, expanded universe. That there was at the time so much, and if you were keeping up with it, it was relatively, I don't want to say necessarily easy, but I know for myself, I missed a huge chunk of time in consuming all of that material. So I ended up going back and trying to do it all. And it was a little bit overwhelming. And granted, I think the High Republic is even more saturated in different types of media than even Legends was, or Expanded Universe. But so yeah, I mean there's a lot. There's definitely a lot.
Indeed. All right. Well, Jay, it is your turn. You brought up some topics earlier. Do you want to visit one of those, or do you want to discuss a different point about the book?
Well, I have to talk about Marchion Ro because he is definitely my favorite villain that I love to hate. And you were talking about Mark Thompson, Greg, and I just absolutely love listening to Mark Thompson do the voice of Marchion Ro. I mean, Dennis knows that hands down, I think that's like the best voice character ever. He just drips with just disdain and the whole 9 yards. But I mean, this truly does illustrate how Marchion was just he was off his rocker, but yet he was also wicked smart at the same time in so many different ways. He was so devious. And, as you said, Dennis, he definitely got his comeuppance at the very end, but we finally kind of understand from Marchion's point of view, what his true motives were. And again, to borrow from Marvel, it was very Thanos in a lot of ways. I mean, he just wanted to just wipe out everybody. I mean, he didn't even want to, he wanted to rule over people, but if he couldn't, he just wanted to wipe them out, and just because he could. And so there's that deep sense of evading justice and just trying to do things just to be able to do it. And that this shadow that's been lingering in the galaxy for so long, I mean, even from his whole lineage, coming to this point, and then the Jedi being able to overcome that. And there's that at one point where Bell, when he's fighting him, he just says, "You are," I think he says, "tedious. You're just," he calls him like ridiculous or tedious. And it's when Marchion is just going on and on and on and on and on, and then Bell's just like, "All right, dude, you're tiresome." That's what it was. He said, "You're just tiresome." And it just goes to show that, eventually the Jedi, they just get tired of it, and they just do what they do best.
Greg, what do you think about Marchion Ro and his motivations here in this book?
I mean, what an achievement he is. And I'm going to honor the question of this book, but also just thinking about him as one of the more original kind of creations of the High Republic project is just kind of astounding. And, I think Star Wars has such a rich history of villains. It's very, impressive that they found a totally new model, right? He's got aspects of the Sith, but as Jay was just alluding to, he wants power, but he actually doesn't want to wield it, right? He doesn't want to control all these planets and like manage them and create a confederacy or something. He just wants to be the most powerful there. And the other kind of model of Star Wars villain would be probably something like Thrawn, and Marchion has a little bit of that. He's got the strategic, he's very smart, as Jay just said, but like he's not Thrawn either. And then you throw in that he, is a very formidable fighter, and I guess that's like a Dirge or a Darth Maul. It's kind of all the Star Wars villains to some degree mixed together. And just also to shout out, Mark Thompson's just incredible. And I can't I hear that voice when I read Marchion now, which is really wonderful. Or I just recently purchased at Target has very dangerously started selling single packs of Star Wars Unlimited, which are just too easy to throw in the cart. But I cracked one open the other day and Marchion was in it. I just heard that voice kind of. So I thought he was really fun in this book. And, it follows a model for me. I think about historical examples where when the leader kind of achieves their power, they still aren't satisfied, right? And they just want more. And we've seen this as rulers have gone mad in history. I'm thinking of like King George and so on, that they just kind of decide eventually to burn it all down or to kind of spoil it all so nobody can have it. I'm taking the galaxy and going home. So the fact that he kind of went so far over the edge and yet kind of still always felt like that kind of snobby aristocratic kind of warlord type really worked for me. And I will say, I thought his ending, and it's so scary to say it out loud because I know it's full spoilers, but I've never spoken it out loud. But the fact that he ends up, the man who has the biggest ego in the galaxy ends up just living totally alone and nobody's going to listen to him forever is delicious. And I don't think I ever suspected a redemption arc, but I did kind of probably, if you had asked me in May, I would have said probably a combat death, right? Like a dual death. And this was so much more satisfying. And thinking about him, and Jay brought up balance before. It's very interesting that Elzar and Avar end up isolated but together, and Marchion ends up isolated but totally alone. And that's just, again, this way in which the balance is doubled there and is just totally beautiful. So I love it all. And I loved the moments where he just got totally out of control in this as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You both had a lot that was great to say there. And where to begin on Marchion? I remember when the High Republic was being promoted before we read a word of it, when we were being told that Marchion Ro was going to be this villain on the order of Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine. I'm like, that is such a huge claim that they made back in the day, years ago, 5 years ago at this time. Whether they succeeded, you can debate that. However, he is memorable. He is in his own league right now, a different type of villain. I think you both said this very well. What I loved about Marchion here is that he didn't entirely know what it was he wanted, and I think he finally stumbled into it over the course of the High Republic, which is, he goes on to talk about how he's been trying to figure out what it is that life's about, and it is to have like a decision that matters, and then ultimately he figures out the only decision that ultimately matters is the final decision. And so what better way to win than to make the final decision that wipes out the entire galaxy? And he figures out he can do that by killing off the Nameless. His pet Jedi destroyers are tied to the blight, and by killing them, he accelerates the blight and he destroys the entire galaxy. It's the ultimate decision. And then you put that next to his fate, which is he has all of his agency taken away, nearly all of it. They put him on an asteroid, little space station thing that's just floating through space that no one ever would find, that has no ability to contact anybody, with droids that can't even talk. So even if he's trying to exert his will over them and have some decision that affects them, even if he's successful, when he figures out it's not, it leads to nothing. But he doesn't get like any back talk from them. They can't answer him. They can't tell him he was right, that he had any impact on anything. It is the ultimate punishment for this villain. I love that he got his defeat at the hands of Bel Zettifar. So he did have that physical defeat, but then to have the moral defeat, the ego defeat here, even when he's on trial in the Senate, and he finally gets up and says, you all are so, small, you had everything, you were the entire galaxy, but you did nothing. I did everything. And everyone's just kind of like, you're talking, you're done. Okay, fine. Off to your prison you go. And it's just, for all of his bravado, it all came to this ultimate knot. And so that was just poetic for me. I really love the way that was the punctuation, the exclamation point on this series. That's what it all amounted to for Marchion here. So yeah, well done by the High Republic, the Project Luminous crew on that. So, okay. Well, while we're hitting some big points, let's talk about, and I hope one of you wrote it down because I failed to do so in my notes, Planet X, the Nameless homeworld here. We've finally got introduced to this planet in phase 2, and we knew this is where the Nameless came from. But what was this place all about? Why was it that it was the birthplace of the blight and everything that was happening in the galaxy, and then its ultimate impact in here? I've got a little bit of mixed feelings about this planet here, and it's that, okay, fine. It's the homeworld of the Nameless, the Shriekerai, which is fantastic. Love that. Especially love the way that they tied in the Nameless's name to, Shriekerai Karai, the little nursery rhyme that was scaring all the Jedi youngling and Padawans through the years. And then the explanation of those is like virgins in the Force that form around the blight, and then it was the light and the dark that were balancing each other, and the Nameless were there keeping them in balance so that the blight could be under control. And with the death of Nameless, you get a new egg, but it takes decades for those to mature, and that's what's caused all of this. That was a pretty neat explanation. That's so what reminded me of Charles Soule's other work, like the Timeless Vessel and the like. There, that those type of vibes that I got from that. So I'm not going to talk about this too much because I want to get your guys' thoughts on it here. The one thing that I just nags at me is that it feels like a loose end out there. The Jedi have sworn oaths that only the Jedi Council know about it, and they're never going to reveal where this planet is, but it's still there. And it's just kind of it is a catastrophe waiting to happen again in a way. But maybe I'm just too eager to have a bow that wraps everything up so that we don't have to worry about this thread again. But Greg, what do you think about that?
This was actually going to be not quite the same point I was going to offer for my next one. So, I'm going to have to scramble now. But I was thinking that I think if you were somebody who this didn't work for, I think Planet X is the hardest piece to swallow, right? Because it feels kind of like a stretch of Star Wars mythology. It's not totally unlike Mortis or Dagobah, right? These kind of wellspring of the Force planets where there's kind of a location that is just somehow more mystical in some ways. But I think it is pretty difficult to kind of understand all the mechanics of it. And if I'm turning on my skeptical mind, it's everything you just said, but also like, and so then the blight can just appear anywhere and just start to kind of, but it happens to be underneath the Coruscant temple, and it happens to be, in all these places that matter a lot to us. It's a little convenient in terms of narrative as a part of that. Jay referenced Legends, so now I get to really lean into it, which is it reminded me a lot of the Legends character of Revan, who I won't spoil. I mean, it's a very old video game, but I won't spoil all the bits of that mythology. But if you played Knights of the Old Republic, is the video game he comes from, he got a very specific ending. And I was shocked, maybe, I don't remember the exact timeline, but 7-8 years later, when they developed the Old Republic kind of massively multiplayer online game, I didn't get very far because I didn't have any friends. So I did like massively solo online gaming. And one of the things that is they undid his ending, and he got a new story. And this is all in the kind of Revan novel that came out back then and so on. And I do think what you just said, Dennis, is exactly right. That like, it's an ending, it's there and it's settled. But if they want to open it back up, I think that would be one of the places they could open it back up. And kind of in that Revan model, the fact that, because this is a kind of fantasy supernatural planet, I can see it being like 100 years later and somebody could go see Avar and Elzar still there, right? Like still kept alive by the Force and these mystical powers. And so I don't think I can fully agree that I felt like it was unsettled, that, it is kind of complete in terms of the story. And if they never picked it up again, I that would work. But I think you're right that, it seems like 10 years from now, some enterprising Star Wars author will be like, what if Luke Skywalker went to Planet X or stumbled upon Planet X? Or what if Ahsoka on the way back into this galaxy stopped off there? And I think we are all of a fandom age where, we know that those things happen and they totally upend your expectations. And I think I'm okay with that because I will trust and that they'll make the right decision, or I'll be critical of that story when it comes.
Jay?
There you go. Well, I think both of you made some amazing points there, and I can't really add too much more to that. I will concur with the idea that I do think that Planet X is a force, vengeance, if you will. You mentioned Dagobah. I mean, Lothal is another one. Even Brendok in the Acolyte. I mean, that's another one, that we can look at. So as far as putting a bow on it, to your point, Greg, I don't think we need one. We got a satisfying enough ending, but just enough of a loose end that it could potentially be picked up at another time. The only thing that I'm thinking about with, as you said, Dennis, with the blight just appearing on these worlds, I think that and I might be wrong in this, but I think that there was at least, one nameless on the planet when the blight appeared. So, we had at the Jedi temple on Coruscant, and that's where the blight was appearing. We had Nameless on Kashyyyk, that's where the blight was appearing. So it would appear where there were Nameless, and where it was basically in response to the agony of the Nameless. And when one of them would die, obviously, then the blight would take over more, and that's what Marchion was trying to do by savagely controlling and killing these creatures. For me too, again, just to borrow from Legends, it's almost the exact opposite of what the Yuuzhan Vong did when they were basically terraforming everything with their living like coral. This is just the opposite. Marchion Ro was taking over the galaxy with this blight that was going to kill everything, as opposed to terraforming things with coral. So I appreciated kind of the juxtaposition of that, again, death versus life kind of thing. But again, to kind of wrap everything up, I do think that it was a good way to wrap it up. I was satisfied. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Like I said, it's just something that nags me at the back of my mind, which is, because I mean, Aslan Rel discovers Barnabas, whatever his name was, the Jedi that was first there, his ship at some point. And so there's like all these avenues to get back there. And just for me, it's like, this was a great story element, fantasy, sci-fi, space opera type of element that I like for this era. However, there's so much more that's come up. There's so much more in the history of Star Wars that occurs after this, and this is never thought of again. And you can conveniently tuck it away, but at some point in a galaxy where people are always stumbling upon things, it, in my mind, at least, it just strains credulity a little bit that this has not come up again, and that it will not come up again at somehow. All right, I don't want to dwell on that too much there. I do think it was really cool the way they described it as being a planet that was like a pearl. There was this blight, and then there was this Virgins of the Force that formed around it, and then it's these structures of the light and the dark. And then because so many Nameless had died and they weren't able to control it, we saw these, the chaos between the two of them, and very much the yin and yang type symbolism that was going on here, on all that. And then Avar and Elzar making that sacrifice to repair everything was quite fantastic. I like the way that worked out. But again, it's just something that nags me at the back of my mind. But I've had my say.
Quick.
Yeah.
One thing, Greg, I love the idea of potentially Ahsoka running across this in a world between worlds kind of thing, because I think that could potentially happen. It's something that would be viable. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I name checked Mortis, and like, again, if you'd asked me 4 years ago, I would have been like, oh, Mortis is a weird thing they did one time, and that was the end of it. But clearly, it's a big part of what we're experiencing now on that show. So, again, I try to be open to it all, even when I may be skeptical of the choice, just to not extend the issue anymore. But I also want to say, I really wanted a name. Planet X just doesn't quite work for me.
It's in the book. It is in the book.
Oh, okay.
And that's why I was saying I was hoping one of the two of you wrote it down in your notes.
I did it.
But it comes up at the end once the Sri Karai reveal who they are. And I think it starts with an S, but I just couldn't. I think it's in the final bit with Elzar and Azar doing their thing that we get to see at the end. At any rate, Jay, maybe you've got a tab for it. We'll find out as we're going through. Greg, but it's back to you. What next do you want to discuss? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut the conversation off right there for this week. We will air part 2 of our discussion with Greg next week on our usual Wednesday discussion time slot. So make sure you come back for that. But until then, I just want to say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of the High Republic. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion of the High Republic. And if you want to see what we thought about all the previous entries, then you can scroll through our back catalog on your favorite podcatcher of choice, and you will find them. We've covered all the adult novels, all the young adult novels, most of the comics, and some of the manga. We really haven't hit the middle grade or the High Republic Adventures comics so much, but we've got plenty of coverage out there of the High Republic that you can get our thoughts on things overall if you are so inclined. And once you subscribe to the podcast, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could rate and review on your podcatcher of choice. Of course, the number one avenue for that is Apple Podcasts. That's the biggest driver in helping the algorithm get the podcast in front of more listeners. And beyond that, if you just want to share it with word of mouth, we wouldn't complain about that. And once you are done doing those things, if you want to check out more episodes of the show beyond what you're likely to find on your podcatcher of choice, head over to retrozap.com. That's the home of the RetroZap Podcast Network, and there's a bunch of other great podcasts there covering all kinds of things in pop culture. Most notably of late, you've got Enjoy Stuff, Superhero Suite, Love, Death, and Robots Plus have all been active. Some other great podcasts from the past, such as Brews and Blasters and Warp Trails, are there as well. And just as a reminder, we can be reached on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. Jay has sent up some Pinterest pages for us, so if you want to go over there and find all kinds of lists that she's got going on, that's a great place for it. And the show is available on YouTube and YouTube Music, audio only. We just aren't doing the video thing right now. And if you're looking for a Podcast Stardust t-shirt or other merch, the best place you can do that is over on TeePublic. I have a link in the show notes for that. So, upcoming on the show on Friday, we are going to be getting back into some recent Star Wars news. At least that's the current plan. We'll see what has actually come up this week. On Monday, we'll get into the next episode in our The Clone Wars rewatch. And we just finished with the Zola Beast, so we got some other cool stuff coming up. But with that, just want to say thank you for listening to episode 933 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be